Hello and welcome to the Bigger Picture podcast. Today I have with me a returning guest, Seth Allison, to continue our conversation, this time focusing on internal family systems, and hopefully we'll be able to touch a little bit on Carl Jung's idea of archetypes. Seth, welcome to the show.
Hi, Roni. Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you here again. I loved our conversation last time on attachment, and I've really been looking forward to diving deeper with you into IFS. I just recently really discovered internal family systems, and I really find it a groundbreaking approach. So, how
Mm.
about we give people a little bit of background? What exactly is IFS? And maybe we can also tell people how it developed.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And yeah, I enjoyed our conversation very much last time as well. And hopefully we can make a little bit of a bridge from attachment and emotion focused therapy into
Oh, absolutely.
IFS. I think it's helpful to start with how IFS developed. And I'll even place it in the context of kind of a flow of psychological theory through the 20th century,
Amazing.
um, so psychoanalysis as developed by Freud um, is a very, what we call a structural theory of mind. And a lot of people would know kind of id, ego, superego of these sectors of the human psyche, and ego representing kind of a center of consciousness and awareness, and it has defense mechanisms and this energy pushing up from the id, impulses, drive, sexual, aggressive, and then containment from a superego, kind of
Right.
internalized sort of norms of society. Um, so it's a hydraulic model based on kind of the technology of the time, the steam engine.
Right, right.
Uh, so as you move forward into the 50s and 60s, there's a real swing towards behaviorism, which is not really a theory of mind, but a theory that's about contingencies and reinforcers in the environment. And psychology and treatment moves towards behavioral intervention. It moves into actually the field of medicine as well. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, which a lot of people know, kind of is similar, but also working with thoughts. But again, there isn't really a theory of a structured mind so much. Out of this comes family therapy. And this is where Dick Schwartz, the developer of internal family systems, was coming from in the 70s. As he was going through grad school, he was a structural family therapist. He was studying how to work with a family system. So as a therapist, he'd have a family in a room. He was looking to join with the family and kind of, like a good therapist, kind of engage and build rapport, understand everybody's position, get them to explore and talk about what the dynamics in the family were. But the idea of like healing and fixing the problem was largely about moving parts around in a system, clarifying boundaries, making sure parents were in their appropriate leadership roles and kids were in their appropriate roles. And if there was difficulty in the marriage subsystem, working on that. But it was very much about external movement of parts of a system. So Dick was working with a particular clientele. They were actually bulimic women who Dick likes to say that despite his efforts, they didn't realize they were cured.
Right, right.
And
I love that.
right. And he, in a kind of a crisis of like, okay, everything I know isn't working, started to listen to them, and they were talking about internal parts of them, and he kind of just sort of went with it, but he still was a family therapist and he was still thinking as a family therapist would. And so he would start to listen to these parts and try to understand them. And just like you would with like an upset dad in a family therapy session, um, a family therapist might say, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to ask you if you could just step back for a moment so we could hear what mom is saying or what the kid needs to say. Are you okay with doing that? Well, that's literally what he would do with these parts. And to his surprise, they actually started responding. And just to be clear, when I say responding, we're not talking metaphorically. We're talking quite literally, talking to parts of you that are inside of you. And then realizing, and this is one of the big moments in IFS, there's several, but when you first realize that a part speaks back to you, it's a little like, oh, wow, okay, I can have a dialogue with this part. So Dick kind of rolled with this, and he learned some things that became consistent principles of what he called internal family systems. Um, and part of that was just clearing space between parts that would get locked in um, polarities or conflict. Um, and as he got them to step back, something spontaneous would happen. And the core concept in IFS is what his clients would say, oh, that's myself, and that would not be a part. It was something different. It was a different entity. And one of the things that I think frustrates the academic scientific community is that Dick very intentionally stayed with the language of his clients.
Right.
He didn't blow it into something that was really a rigorous model of like how we make sense of all this in a material way. He just kind of said, okay, they call it self. Let's stick with self. And he noticed certain qualities about this energy, this state. I think it's maybe easier for people to think of it initially. You enter into a state that feels different. And a lot of us have experiences of being in a flow state,
Exactly.
or like, oh my gosh, I'm really centered. I feel like I can really focus, and I'm curious, and I'm compassionate. And there are these qualities that he noticed. He calls them the 8 C's. I printed them all out, and I forgot to bring them, but
No worries. It's
you may
a
be able to help
calm,
me.
curious,
Good,
and
compassionate,
okay.
right? Clear, right? And there are other ones. Confident is an important one.
Is creative
Uh,
another, or am I just okay?
creative's a very important one because a lot of times when we're stuck or what he calls blended, where parts of us are blended with ourself, or kind of if you picture a Venn diagram, these concentric circles. Um, if you have kind of self is in the middle, when we get blended, we have parts that come in and kind of take over. And sometimes two parts are at war and they kind of both blend. And you can't find that center place. You can't find that curious, basically you can't step back and be objective about what's happening in your own mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I
Yeah,
just want to pause really quick.
yeah,
I think the fact that he was working with women with eating disorders is really important because
yeah.
that kind of experience, whether we're talking about disordered eating or addictions, you feel like a
Yeah,
part of yourself, this part that you
yeah.
don't like, that it's not you, takes
That's
over
right.
in those
That's right.
episodes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really relevant. And that I think really helped him understand that we're not always ourself.
100%. And yes, I agree. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was eating disordered patients that taught him this. Um, he, like Jung, was kind of brought into a situation where he um, really was put into a beginner's mind kind of place. And his teachers became, his clients became his teachers. Um, and addiction and eating disorders, which have a lot in common, um, are really great examples of this, of I'm doing this, I'm saying this, I'm feeling this, but it doesn't feel like me. I feel like I'm hijacked. And I think a lot of us relate. I mean, all of us relate to that.
And I don't like this
Anyone
part.
who's
I
dealt
want to
with,
get rid
yeah,
of it.
totally. Yeah. And anyone who's dealt with depression or anxiety, um, this is familiar. Um,
Absolutely.
and yet, a lot of us have parts, in fact, all of us, but not a lot. There's nobody walking around. There's nobody walking around. This is important. Um, so a caveat here, I went, doing
Yeah, yeah.
training. Um, one of the trainers was asked, and he'd been doing this for 30 years. Um, so, and all of us are therapists, but we're all like, oh my gosh, I don't have any self energy. What? Oh no. And like, how often are you in self? And he said, oh, I mean, at best 30% of the time. And we
On
were
a
like,
good
oh,
day.
okay, oh my God, okay, all right, good. And I have to say that's actually pretty high. Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's like he's achieved quite a bit if he can be in self a third of the time. Um, Most of the time, parts of us are kind of running things behind the scenes, and we don't know it. But I think another concept here is we can reify this, and we can say self is this thing that you're either in or you're not, and that's not a part of the model. We talk about being in self, but really self energy, those 8 C's, can be had on a spectrum of 1 to 100.
Right.
That energy can be more or less present, and there are parts of us that contain elements of that energy, um, and they can be sneaky because they kind of feel like
They can blend.
self. They can blend, and we don't realize it. Um, so yeah, I'm laying out this model, and it's a lot to digest if you've never heard it before. So I'll pause there. Are there any
That,
things you want to dive deeper on with that?
no, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Mm,
I do want to talk about this paradigm shift that he's introducing, where
hmm
we are moving away from a mono mind approach. We like to
Yeah,
think
very
of
good.
ourselves as this one
Right,
entity, this one being, one mind.
right,
And all of a
right,
sudden, we're discovering that we have these sub personalities and they feel
right.
like parts of ourselves. But when we start becoming curious and looking into them, we see that
hmm
they have almost their own autonomous will, their own
Yeah,
tendencies and
right,
behaviors, their own
right,
agendas. And
right.
I think that's a real paradigm shift for a lot of people.
100%. I think I I I kind of misspoke there. There are several aha moments when you do this. That's the first one.
Right,
Um,
right.
I actually am made of parts, and it's controversial. It's less controversial now because IFS has been around for 40 years and is now an outcome-based, well-researched um, therapeutic modality. Um, so not as controversial as it used to be, but oh my gosh, when it came out, yeah. Um, because Dick, unapologetically, and I think quite bravely, says, no, these parts are real. These are distinct entities that have autonomy and they're inside of you and they are you, but they really function pretty independently. So
Right.
you have a family in there. You have an entire system that's working together, and there are some qualities about parts that are really important, that are kind of the guiding principle here with parts is that there are no bad parts. Um, a la
Oh,
the title
beautiful.
here, no bad parts. Um, so it's a very important piece here. Then this is also tricky for people. Is there no parts that have bad intentions ultimately? That
Right.
all parts are there to serve and help us, but it doesn't appear that way.
They get stuck in bad roles, is how he puts it, which I really love
Right,
because he said that he worked with sex offenders. And that's when he kind
right,
of had that aha moment where
right,
even those parts that offended, they had good intentions for the person. They were trying to protect something very vulnerable, and
right.
obviously they did so in an awful way, but the parts themselves were well intentioned towards the individual. And that's hard to wrap our heads around, but I think it's the first step in empathizing with those parts and realizing, we need to be open, we need to accept, we might not like it, but being a little curious here.
Well, a lot curious. It takes a lot of faith
Hmm.
in the model. Um, Faith that I'll say Dick earned not overnight, but over his career, and that I've come to earn over my career because you see it work. And so, sex offenders is that's a very, I mean, one of the hardest ones for us to get our
Hmm.
mind around. But like an easier example would be like addiction,
Right,
where
right.
there's a part of us, um, and addicts can get to the point where they're like, I don't want to do this anymore, but I can't stop. And how is that alcoholic part that's saying it's okay, you can drink, you probably should, you can stop tomorrow, it's lies. How is that good? And a shorthand here is that, and we should talk about the three different kinds of parts, although
Right, right.
there may be more. Um, there are extreme parts that get caught in their role, essentially, and we call them firefighters. Um, it is to keep the whole system from burning down,
Exactly.
and
Keeping you from committing suicide in these really extreme cases.
and suicidal parts are firefighters that ultimately have good intentions as well, and that's a tough one for
To
people to
stop the
get.
pain.
But yeah, but if you've dealt with suicidal thoughts, as I have in my uh, journey, I've dealt with severe depression, and um, I've done work with these parts, and I've come to really um, appreciate that they would be, in a sense, brave enough to sacrifice themselves and their own existence to get me and other younger parts of me out of pain that doesn't seem to have any solution. And
Wow.
sometimes the suicidal thoughts are just comforting, which I think firefighters ultimately are there to soothe
Yep.
and to deal with pain that we don't have answers for. Um, and, thankfully, it never for me got to a point where that was going to get actualized. But um, having gratitude towards those parts began to shift them. It
Hmm.
began to shift them when they felt understood and they felt appreciated. Um, it began to loosen. But when that happens, there are other parts that appear that are really hurting, and the model calls those parts exiles. Um, in broader Western culture, we've kind of developed the term inner child,
Right.
um, but they do tend to be younger parts that are holding the feelings of trauma and the memories in their body of trauma, or and by trauma we mean um, we could mean experiences of life and death as they were registered in the body. We can mean disruptions with attachment figures, which also register in the body as really threatening, dangerous experiences. So anything that was dangerous that had no solution to it gets pretty locked in these parts that are younger. And then we get another class of part we call protectors or managers, um, that are trying to keep those parts safe, and they develop strategies for doing that. And they get locked in their roles too. We'll talk more about managers. But when managers and their strategies are failing and exiles are like coming up, kind of like Freud's id pushing up, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
these terrible feelings and memories, or they start to push up into consciousness or awareness in the body, and that's when we need sometimes more extreme solutions, compulsive behavior, more extreme soothing things, addictive behaviors, um, even dissociative things. You know, you could think of like Netflix binges as like firefighters coming to distract us and take us away. Um, yeah, let me pause there. So you have the exiles, you have the manager level, and the firefighters. There's some other stuff like guides that we could get into. That's a little gets a little woo-woo for people, but that's a part of the model now too.
No, I would love
Um,
to. I would love to explore
yeah.
that as well. But what is amazing for me is, as I was reading his book, he invites you to do these exercises.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
without really knowing yet what exiles, protectors, and firefighters were,
Hmm.
all three popped up for me. You know, I
Yeah.
saw the
Yeah.
exile, I saw the firefighter, and then I saw the manager
Hmm.
in the corner. and
Hmm.
and
Uh-huh.
it's absolutely amazing how these
Yeah.
things really do exist and interact
Yeah.
with each other. And one of his strengths, I think, of this model is that he really does stick closely to the experience of his patients and the language of his patients.
Yeah, bingo. And when you closed your eyes and did that exercise, are experiencing what the blind man putting his hands on the elephant of the psyche. That's exactly what he experienced with his clients, what you just said. And so it's really not, hey, I developed this idea that there are managers and firefighters. It's like, no, that's just what appears. And it just
Right.
happens that as he worked with hundreds and now thousands of people, it's like these same parts and these same classifications of parts really appeared consistently in everybody. Um, so that, yeah, it's a very what I call experience near model. You don't have to go up in your head and conceptualize a whole lot. I think a lot of us have manager parts that need to have an intellectual map and some, I call it scaffolding,
Mm-hmm.
that's like makes it like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay, we could try this, I guess. Um, and then after you do it, it's really helpful to be like, okay, here's a map that makes sense out of what just happened, and here's how to use it. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
another thing that is amazing is I, for a while, was very aware of this idea of the inner child and,
Mm-hmm,
attachment wounds and this experience of mm-hmm.
mm-hmm,
having this 5-year-old within. But there was something missing in my work with that inner child that Dick Schwartz really hits the nail on the head because it is a system and you don't know how to address the child at first. And what I loved about your analysis also was you really tie in attachment and IFS.
mm,
So I would love to hear
yeah,
how you see these two things related.
yeah. So great. I think what might be helpful there is to give people a sense of like actually how that goes. So when you said, I've worked with my inner child and, it has attachment wounds, um, that's the idea of the burden, that
Mm-hmm.
there's um, something carried, oh, got a cat here, something carried in the body. And he would say, in the body, this part has. I know which people are like, what? But yeah, a felt sense in the body um, of what it was like to have that disruption in the connection with your attachment figure. Um, But you said something interesting, which is I don't know how to deal with that.
Right.
And what we would do is we'd say, okay, let's check that out because there's a part of you here that is feeling like it doesn't know what to do. And there's a really important, it's not yourself. That's a part, and we would call that part a manager.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what it's showing you is that it's tasked with trying to take care of that part, but it doesn't really know how to do it. And so the part isn't getting soothed, it's not getting healed, it's not being rescued and taken out because the manager doesn't know what to. What a manager does know how to do is usually keep it safe, away from exposure to other people, and the managers will have their strategies of how they do that. But when you go in there and you're like, oh, there's this thing in pain, um, they don't have enough of those C qualities to do it. So in the model, you would kind of notice that feeling of like helplessness, where like, and we would have you pivot your attention to that part. And that's your observation about it. It's not just working with an inner child. You have to work with the whole system.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
so we find as the flow of the model goes, you almost never, and it's not recommended that you go straight to an exile. You start at higher levels with managers or protectors, and you get to know them like Schwartz would join with the family system. You understand what their job is, you understand what they're afraid of, and if they feel like you're there in self, really getting it, they begin to soften, and then like a family therapist, the therapist might say to you, okay, in your inner voice, can you go and just ask that part if it's ready to step back and give you some space so you could go work with that little girl, I assume, in this point, in this example. And the part will either say yeah, and you'll have a sense that it pulls its energy back, or it'll say no, I'm not ready yet. And we say, great, okay. There's a very good reason that you're not willing to do that, and I want to stay here till I understand. Um, and then you kind of do that, and other managers may come in. A firefighter may come in and say, I'm not ready for you to go there because I don't want to have to, I'm going to make him drink or I'm going to make her cut
Mm-hmm.
if we do this. And we say, okay, thank you. I appreciate that you're ready to do what you have to do. And we don't want to do that. So I want to listen to you and let's get to understand what you're afraid of and why you're afraid of it. And yeah, so kind of goes like that.
So, two things there. Well, that explains to me why I immediately started crying because I started the other way around. I saw the exile first and then the
Mm-hmm.
firefighter trying to keep everything,
Mm-hmm.
protected,
Mm-hmm.
and then the manager in the corner. And
Mm.
that was kind of my flow, which was great and powerful and very meaningful. But I really dove in. And another thing that you said, which I wanted to comment on, which is it resonates for me with Jung,
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that the manager doesn't want the exile to show itself to
Mm-hmm.
others. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that reminds me of this idea of the shadow and learning to
Mm.
integrate the shadow. And it depends kind of how we talk
Mm.
about it. Do you know Phil Stutz, his work?
I don't.
There's a really nice documentary that Jonah Hill made of his.
Oh, Stutz. Yes,
Yes,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I
yes, yes.
do. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
he gives it a different name, but the general gist of it is that part of you that you're kind of embarrassed of, that isn't
Mm-hmm.
perfect, and that you're not
Mm-hmm.
letting him into the room. You got to invite him into the room. You have to integrate
Yeah.
him. And
Yes.
yeah, so that really reminds me of this kind of
Mm-hmm.
relationship between the manager and the exile. So how about I I might as well share for people to kind of get a sense
Oh,
of what
great.
came up because it really was enlightening. So, and I don't know about you, but I'm very visual. So there were very strong
Can
visuals
I,
that came up.
can I
Yeah,
pause you there for a second?
please, please.
You're bringing up something really important, and I think it's helpful. So a lot of people experience, maybe most of people experience when they go in and do this work, images.
Hmm.
And there's imagine a spectrum of how much they can image. And Jung was like, off the charts with his
Right.
ability to stay in an imaginative space that was visual. I personally have like zero. And it's frustrating for me when I do this work because I don't get to interact with it visually. But what I think is important for people to get is that parts are ultimately like wanting to be witnessed, and they can communicate different ways. So the scene that you're given, even the way the part looks, the way it might be dressed, the colors around it, it's helpful to imagine that that is being curated as a way of communicating something to you, and you want to be curious about what is it they want me to get. But that can also be thoughts. That could be auditory. That could be a
Hmm.
felt sense in the body. It often is a felt sense in the body. So how a part communicates is an important piece to understand for a person. So for you,
Interesting.
I want you to proceed, but I wanted to make that note, like the data that you're getting is largely visual and I think also emotional and felt. Does that feel right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think
Yeah.
that that is an important distinction because as you know, different personalities have different modalities. Some
Hmm.
people are more kinesthetic, some people are more auditory, some more visual. And
Yes.
I think being open to that, to whatever comes up, is really important
Yes.
here, and
Yes.
not pressuring yourself to have these
That's right.
grand images, and really just being curious and open because things really
That's
do
right.
pop up, whatever your modality of choice is, and it's not something we really choose.
It's important to remember. A lot of people are like, "Am I doing this right?" Which is, of
Hmm.
course, that's a manager coming in and being like,
Yeah,
ah. And the important part is, well, you're not doing anything. It's what are your parts doing that you're trying to ultimately get into a position of observing and noticing, um, as if you were encountering a painting or a sunset, or you see a bunny in your yard. You have a sense in the outer world of a distinction between you as the observer and what's being observed. That's tougher in the inner world, but we're going for that. We're going for an encounter like that world is Dick would say, that's a real world. That's not,
absolutely.
it's a real world in there. And so you're a traveler, you're a visitor, you're going into this real world and you're getting to know these parts. Sorry about that.
No,
I
no,
want to
that's
go back to your
perfect.
experience.
That's
Yeah.
perfect. That's perfect. And I really agree here. For anyone who is listening to us and thinking there is absolutely no way that I'm made up of multiple parts, even if you can't grasp that in terms of objective reality, it is the psychic, experiential, phenomenological reality.
Yep.
It's what we
Right.
experience, and that's good enough. That is real in
Right.
a psychic sense, and it's
Right.
something to work with. So I'll tell
Go
you
for
kind
it.
of the journey that came up for me. It started with this felt sense of this like very dark hole, this like bottomless pit, and that's where my
Mm,
addictions come in, my anxious
mm,
attachment, this kind of feeling that you are
mm,
never satisfied and never soothed. And that can,
mm,
turn into
mm,
depression, that can get really dark, but it's that hunger. It's hunger for connection and whatnot.
mm,
And it
mm,
started there. And then I saw the little girl. It's me, 5 years old.
mm,
And
mm,
she's just in a black vortex and she's crying and
mm,
she's alone. And it's almost kind of raining around her. And there's almost
Mm.
this like dark castle in the background. God knows why that
Mm.
came up. But
Mm-hmm.
that was the image that popped up, and she's just there all by herself, crying, and almost like she has this supernatural power of
Mm.
creating this, weather system, this like storm around her.
I love this. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's her. That's this little
Mm-hmm.
5-year-old girl. And then the firefighter came up. I didn't know to call it a firefighter at the time, but it's me when I get really angry. And that is part of the anxious attachment. For anyone who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know, anxious attachment is often characterized by protest behaviors. You are
Very good.
so seeking connection and you're so afraid to lose connection that you become very angry and you use
Right.
hyper activating strategies of showing your distress. And that character for me was just me in this almost Hulk like rage.
Very good.
Red face, fuming,
Mm-hmm.
fuming,
Mm-hmm.
raging. And another thing that we can talk about later, but that almost morphed to me into the image of Kali. She's this
Mm-hmm.
goddess, this destroyer
Mm.
mother. She's basically the terrible mother archetype. She's the terrible
Mm.
feminine archetype. She's the as the great mother is the giver of life, Kali is the destroyer of life. And that angry feminine energy, that rage, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I saw that.
Yeah.
I really, really
Yeah.
saw that. And
Mm.
I can understand why she's angry. She's protecting this really, really sad 5-year-old girl
Mm.
who's completely vulnerable and helpless.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and then I saw in the corner, I didn't have time to address her too much, but I saw
Mm-hmm.
the manager, and that was me, I guess, like a teenager, we could say, with
Mm-hmm. Okay.
straight hair, perfect straight
Mm.
hair all the way down, and a perfectionist. Like we got to be
Yeah.
perfect. We need that 5-year-old to be loved, and she's not going to be loved if she's not perfect. And
Mm.
that system all came up, and God, you can understand why I was crying the whole way through. It was very, very powerful. But what I did to begin with was I walked up to the little girl, and like I got down onto her level. I got down on my knees,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and I just gave her a hug. I just started from there.
Mm.
Like I understand
Mm-hmm.
why you're hurting. You don't
Mm.
deserve to feel this way. I'm here
Mm.
now. I'm a big girl
Mm-hmm.
now. I'm here now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry I didn't address you enough.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry
Mm-hmm.
you've been doing this alone,
Mm-hmm.
feeling alone, and I'm here now. And whenever
Mm.
you need, you can come to me. And I've never had that experience before. And
Mm.
she gave a
Mm.
really, really strong hug. And ever since
Mm.
then, I'll just say, whenever I kind of feel that, that black hole feeling, I imagine her just like grabbing onto my
Mm.
leg like a little kid grabs his mother's
Mm.
skirts. And I'm just like, oh, you're here. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're
Mm.
hugging me. You're good.
Yeah.
All is well. All is well. And then, I left her alone when she's calm, and I moved to the firefighter, and I just had to tell her, listen, you have so much energy. Let's use it for good. let's like
That's
let's
great.
yeah, I mean, that's a waste. It's a waste to not use this energy for good. But you
Mm.
can't keep doing this. You can't keep
Mm-hmm.
you can't keep this fire going and
Mm.
channeling it into destructive behaviors. And in the past that was addictions for me,
Mm-hmm.
or being very angry. but
Mm-hmm.
but let's find a way to channel that energy. And I kind of stopped there. The alarm clock
Mm-hmm.
sounded, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, we got to start the day. But that was my morning, and it was so powerful. And I didn't have time to address the perfectionist in the corner, which I need to address.
Uh-huh.
But it was amazing. It was amazing.
Wow.
I've never experienced anything like that, and it helped me understand like what is the system here, and
Yeah.
when I'm going through my day, like I know which one of them needs talking to and needs a little more attention. It helps you orient yourself. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Well, let me just say, for me personally, but also for everyone watching, thank you for being willing to
yeah,
share that. Yeah, I mean, that takes courage to put yourself out there like that, and it really makes the model come alive. And I'm also very happy for you. I mean, I felt the emotion too. That is a very significant moment for you
yeah,
and for your parts to get to experience what that is a great embodiment of self energy. You, first I would say you didn't do anything wrong or out of order there. You were able to find her and approach her directly. And if your system wasn't ready for you to do that, you wouldn't have been able to
right,
do that. And you responded to her very naturally. It doesn't sound, I don't think, if that were feigned or coming from like a manager trying to do IFS well, that wouldn't have worked.
right. It came
Um,
from a very
she
maternal place for me.
that's what it felt very maternal as you described it. And boy, did she respond to it. So, Sue Johnson talks about an attachment figure ideally being available and responsive and emotionally engaged. And so that's an image of you being offering a kind of secure, available, responsive engagement that she trusted immediately. It's like, like a plant growing towards the sun. She's
Hmm.
drawn to that, and the connection with you, uh, in and of itself, soothes her and relieves that anxious attachment state that she's in. The anxious attachment strategies would be the firefighter and the manager,
Right,
but that actual state is an extremely uncomfortable, unresolvable fear and over arousal, right?
right.
Um, so, I mean, how beautiful. And the fact that you can come back and that she now trusts that she can find a way to you. So if you remember our last conversation, it's um, the protest is a reach. It's I feel this in my body. I'm trying to reach or symbolize that to get it soothed. When you respond to me, my system regulates. And that's
Right.
exactly what it sounded like. But what's amazing is you did that once,
Yeah,
and then she knew how to get your attention and come back when she needed to, and you knew how to respond to her. And whereas in the past, I imagine you'd be in the grip of strategies
for sure.
when she got flooded, they'd come in. Um, Look at this. I mean, what a difference.
It is
Uh,
incredible. It is incredible. I can
yeah.
say today, I was in the kitchen cooking before
Hmm.
this, and that feeling
Hmm.
popped up, and it just immediately, it's like, come here, give me a hug. It's all good. And in the past, and let me just say,
Yeah.
disclaimer: I'm a work in progress. Nothing is cured, right? But we're one step closer to enlightenment. But I really did feel that shift. And another thing about the 5-year-old, and I
Hmm.
wonder if there's any other people who have experienced that. The moment she was soothed, what came up for me was what I'm kind of calling the shadow in a sense, was this like little silly 5-year-old girl that I was. I was like so theatrical and so ridiculous and like,
Hmm.
I loved
Hmm.
just being silly. And all of a sudden I saw her engaging in that kind of behavior and just
Mm.
letting that be. And
So,
yeah,
oh, could I comment on
please,
that?
please.
So, Dick observed exactly this phenomena across all of his clients,
Amazing.
that when an exile experiences that connection to self, um, they unburden. Now, you didn't, as far as I know, you didn't describe what in the model would classically be seen as an unburdening ritual,
Okay, what does
where
that look
the,
like?
well, let me say what I heard
Sure,
first, and
sure.
then we'll go back to that.
Absolutely.
But what you saw was what happens when that icky feeling goes away, that parts, and remember how in the strange situation test, a securely attached kid, once they're soothed, do you remember what they do?
A securely attached kid, they do cry. They do,
And
right?
after the parent picks them up and soothes them,
They
what
relax.
happens?
And they relax and they
And
play.
there you go.
Boom.
They resume
Yes.
they resume the developmentally appropriate activity, whatever that might be.
Wow.
So what we find with exiles is after they feel better, you could ask them, okay, and now what would you like to do? And they will tell you. And in this case, she just went and did it. She's restored now to her natural state of being. And isn't that great? I mean,
Wow.
she doesn't have to live in that energy anymore. She can go back to being herself. And I know the language could be confusing, but being more authentically who she is instead of spending all that energy just holding all that stuff.
I think a good word for what you're trying to describe is
Hmm.
she doesn't have to be in that role anymore. And I think I heard
Yeah.
Dick Schwartz talk in that language.
Yeah.
She can assume a different role,
Yes.
developmentally appropriate role.
And in this case, it's to be a fun, theatrical, playful child. And um, I think I'd make a distinction. You could absolutely use that language of role, but exiles don't really, I don't know if Dick would agree with this, but my experience and the way it's talked about is that exiles don't have roles as they've been forced to take on a burden.
I see.
And you could say the role is to hold the burden, but it isn't really. Um, it could, I guess, it can be a job, but often it's experienced more as something in their body that is heavy and dark, and they're just and that has to be let out. And so the typical unburdening is once you've witnessed, in this case, like she's in this dark um, void kind of space. There's the dark castle. It's as if, and this is interesting, I don't know about this if it's true, but she didn't display the energy inside of her. She displayed it around her. That her way of communicating what it was like was, I'm in this place
Right.
and my energy is dark and you went to her in that place. Now that's a part of the process with exiles. We go to them and we see where they're stuck and they show us what it's like. And we ask, what do you want me to witness? What do you want me to see? And they will give images, or they will often give scenes of things that happened. I'm back in my bedroom. I can hear my parents fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to play with my toys, or I'm trying to block it out. Is there anything that you want me to do while I'm here? Go tell them to stop or whatever. Okay, I'll go do that. And then you ask, are you ready to leave this place and go somewhere safe? And if they say yes, you say, we can go wherever you want to go. Sometimes they'll say, well, I don't know. I say, well, just can be imaginary. It could be a place you know, but it has to be safe. It has to feel secure. And often it's in nature. You go to this place, you take a minute, get oriented, and then you invite them to release whatever they're holding in their body. Sometimes they'll say, hey, in this space, in this magical place, you can reach into your body and pull out whatever that icky stuff is. And Dick would say you can release it in a ritualistic kind of way to light, to wind, to water, to the earth, to fire, however you'd like. And parts will like reach into their chest and start pulling out like black goo,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll go into the fire or it'll just go into the air. Um, and once they're done, they often feel the way your little girl felt, like free and light and like they're ready to go be with their friends or they're ready to go play on the swing set or I have a part that wants to just go read a book. And so that movement of taking them out of where they're stuck is often an important part of the unburdening process. So, but I think your example illustrates more of the attachment view that I have.
Right.
That
This EFT approach.
right, that it is, and I don't think this is distinct to attachment. It's part of IFS, but it is the sense of connection to yourself that transforms, and that manualized treatment of unburdening that has these steps to it is very helpful, but it doesn't have to go that
Right. I think this approach is so amazing. It gives completely new
way.
language for knowing ourselves, for getting to know ourselves.
Yeah,
We
right.
feel we make the mistake of thinking that we're masters in our own house, and then we
Oh,
realize
don't we?
yeah,
Yes.
there are other characters at play here. And it's amazing how they each have their own personalities, their own wants and needs, and
Yeah,
own ways of going about getting those needs. And I think
right.
it's really, really profound. And
Yeah,
it was really something for me.
I'm so glad, and I love that you could do it on your own. And I think one of the great things, because the model is so experience near and accessible, that people can listen to the audio book or even just go on YouTube and be walked through an exercise and have these experiences. But I will also say, and in fact, I was listening to an interview with Dick, and he said, and keep in mind, this is the founder of the theory who's been doing it for 40 years, said at this point, I can work with my parts and often get them to unblend. But if I need to do unburdening and the heavy work of healing, I need to go to my therapist and do that. And
Interesting.
I was like, oh, that feels better. Like, because I think there's an attachment frame there too. And so part of the model is that the therapist brings self energy into the system. And that's
Interesting.
really important, that self energy isn't just, it's not, and this is where it could connect to Jung a little more, that self energy is, um, Dick would say, um, that an individual self is just a little particle of the larger self. And that, of course, gets everybody like, "Whoa, what does he mean?" Um, but it is a spiritual statement. He doesn't back off of that. That he believes that that energy, which we can't really know, but we could describe by its traits, um, is pervasive and that it exists in everyone. And he says that everyone has a self and that selves are impermeable to trauma, and that they are whole and complete and they're there from the very beginning, and they are connected to this larger energy. So if a therapist can bring in their self energy into a system, the parts respond to that and the self is strengthened in that person. So, it's very important for people listening to this to understand, um, there are also limits depending on the burdens you're carrying. We all have trauma, whether we experienced abuse or we just grew up in a family that couldn't attend to certain parts of us, or we live in a culture that is carrying legacy burdens of violence. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that trauma can appear in our system. All of us have that. Um, to the extent that we ourselves aren't able to hold that, then we need to go get support. And that is like the most efficient thing we could do. Like we talked about, I love the phrase interpersonal solutions. I'm going to trademark it eventually.
It's a good
But
one.
like, it's like, yeah, you can't, we're trying to do this by going internal. Um, and it's like we're trying to do it by ourselves. But what you're saying actually is, I'm not really doing it by myself. There's a lot going on in here. And you wouldn't have been able to do this without a little bit of guidance from a book or a meditation that walked you through it. And that book and that meditation are helping you kind of lend and capture some self energy. Um, and this podcast, hopefully, is lending that to people too.
Hopefully,
Um,
I hope so. I will say,
I think so.
I will say that it's not that I woke up one morning, read the book, and all was well. I've been in therapy for many
Yeah,
years. So I'm
right,
familiar, with my
right.
demons, so to speak. But
Yeah,
this was a new way of getting to know
yeah,
myself and having a conversation, having the right
that's
kind of
right.
conversation too.
Yeah,
That interpersonal element was really
yeah,
powerful because even though
yeah,
I
very good.
knew about the concept of the inner child, I never
Uh-huh,
approached her in that way. And
uh-huh.
I also never allowed myself to even explore what was going on there in terms of the visuals, in terms of the feeling. It's the way he guides it is very helpful
Mm-hmm,
there. So there's definitely
mm-hmm.
definitely a tool there that can really help people if they're struggling,
Yeah.
whatever they're struggling with. Um,
It's
so
a
yeah,
it's a very um, it's a very utilitarian model that can be used just about any time, anywhere, because it is the nature of our psyche. It's how our psyche is made. So it's rather universal, and in that sense, pretty amazing. Yeah, pretty
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. And I
Um,
will add, it's I have heard that some people have a lot of resistance towards some of their
mhm.
parts. And I will say, the manager in the corner that I didn't have time to approach, it's because I don't like her, you know? So
Good. Yeah.
yeah, so
Uh-huh.
there's also that. It
Uh-huh.
wasn't all
Yeah.
rainbows and roses.
Yeah.
But that element, like, oh, getting to know that, like that's my relationship
Hmm.
with that perfectionistic
Yeah.
part of myself, and like, okay,
Right.
that's something I'm gonna have to open at some point.
Hmm.
But also just there's something in having a feeling towards a personality that I didn't have before. Understanding what my
Yeah.
relationship with that part is, like the language here. It's a relational language. And I
Yeah.
think that's really just what is amazing about it because it introduces this interpersonal element towards
Yes.
dealing with ourselves.
Yeah. You nailed it, and that's why I think it's an attachment-based model.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that it is based on the exact same principles as EFT and other attachment-based psychotherapies, but it's guided and internal. Yeah, it's a relation. You're right. It's a relational model.
I
Um, we talked about this earlier. I'm gonna name it right now, and you've already done a tremendous service here by being so open. Um, but you did mention there's a part you didn't get to work with. And if you wanted to, I could help guide a little bit and we could do some work with that part.
Sure, let's go
Um,
for it.
does that feel okay to you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely curious. So
Great.
hopefully it's a value to people to just see how it works, and hopefully
Yeah,
it
I
won't be too
trust it.
embarrassing.
Well, let's do this first just to be safe.
Yeah,
Can you just do a quick check with your system? And when I say that, what I mean is just close your eyes and in an inner voice, not out loud, just say, does anybody have any concerns about us doing this? And just listen and see if anything speaks to you.
all right.
Yeah.
I think we're game.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I'd like to start by encouraging you to say thank you to your system for being willing to do this. I want to say thank you to your parts for being willing to do this. I'm going to join you in self as best I can. And anybody watching, I would encourage them to kind of hold compassion and openness and curiosity here too. So you don't have to, but if you're comfortable, sometimes it's better to close your eyes and just take a deep breath to center as we get started. Just nice and full, nice and slow. Your breath is almost like a gift to your system. And if you don't mind, just start by saying to your whole inner world, just say, I'm here. And then you may find other parts coming up, and we could talk to them, or we could go find that manager in the corner that you were talking about and see if she's available. Okay, it sounds like, yep,
Yep,
she's
she's
there.
here. She's here.
Okay, so just take a few moments to notice her and just see what she's showing you by where she is and how she's dressed, and just take her in a little bit, and tell me what do you notice about her right away?
Yeah, so things that are coming up is the word uptight, and it's the word
Okay, she seems
nervous.
uptight.
Yeah,
She seems uptight and nervous. Okay.
yeah,
Sounds like she has a lot of anxious energy, a lot of
absolutely.
fear actually. Okay.
Absolutely.
And
And
how old does she seem?
I want to say 15, 16, something like that.
Okay. Great. Young teenager. Yeah. Okay. And this is the same part you encountered before?
Yeah, yeah. Maybe she's even
Okay.
younger, maybe she's even 13 or 14.
Early adolescence. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I want you, as you're with her, I'd like you to notice how you feel towards her right now in this moment.
Yeah, yeah. It's that same kind of a little bit of an aversive energy, to be
Great.
honest. Yeah.
Great. So right now I want you to focus on the aversive energy, and imagine you're just going to pivot your attention to this part of you that has these negative feelings towards her. And I want you to ask that part not to go away, but just take one step back from you. Just one step so that you could see it and get to know it a little bit. Is it willing to do that?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Okay. Tell me
cooperating.
about, good. Can you tell me a little bit? Let's get to know this part a little bit. What's this part like?
Um, she definitely has a lot of anxiety, a lot of worries. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
she she has this really deep sense, this felt sense, this belief that if she's not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
then she won't be loved. And
Okay.
and she feels this very
Yeah.
heavy responsibility to keep
Yeah.
everything together,
Yeah.
to keep everything orderly.
Yeah. So she's a manager for sure.
Hmm.
And she's showing you a lot right now about what it's like to be her. And she's also telling you, here's my job. This is what I do for you. Yeah. And so does it make sense to you why when she looks at this 13, 14-year-old that she'd feel anxious about or not like this part? Does that make sense why she'd feel that way to you?
Um, why the part doesn't like, or, well,
So let me ask you to go back in.
yep, yep.
Go back in. Yeah. So I want you to stay in relationship and dialogue with this part. So I'm gonna do that. That's my fault. Let me ask a different question.
No worries.
Can you ask her what she's scared of?
She's scared of not being loved. She's scared of not being
Hmm.
accepted.
Yeah.
And and this is kind of the only strategy she knows
Yeah.
of dealing with that.
Yeah. So just like ARE, I want you to take the time to reflect that back to her in your inner voice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I hearing you right? Here's what I'm hearing you say. Just take a moment to reflect that. Let's see how she responds. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she is kind of she feels relieved that someone can
yeah,
see how
good.
hard she's working to keep
Yeah,
everything afloat. Yep.
really good, Roni. So notice how you're feeling towards her right now.
Yeah,
How are you feeling towards her?
I have more compassion for her, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Where before I felt this kind of aversive feeling
Mm-hmm.
of why does she have to be this way?
Mm-hmm.
I get it now. I understand where she's coming
Yeah,
from, and
yeah,
I kind of want to help her,
yeah,
unburden herself from this responsibility because
yeah.
I think I can handle the situation better than she
So
can.
I want you to go back in and I
Yep.
want you to tell her that. I want you to tell her that directly, like you're having a conversation. Just, I hear you and I have compassion for you. And I want to take that responsibility. I can handle that responsibility now. You don't have to do that anymore. And just see how she feels about that. Is she willing to trust you right now?
Yeah, she's really relieved. It seems like
Good.
she's been waiting for someone to
Yeah, I bet she has a
yeah,
long time.
yeah, to take
So
that
now,
responsibility.
this is beautiful. Just, I want you to ask her now if she's ready to take a step back so that you can go back to that 13-year-old. Is she ready to give you room now? Good. I'll make sure you thank her for everything she's done and for trusting you right
Yeah, I'll share, the
now.
images that
Mm-hmm.
come up is it is very maternal. It's looking at her face, it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of tucking her hair back, behind her
Mm,
ear, and like it's all good. You don't need to carry this responsibility anymore.
good. Beautiful. So let's pivot your attention back now. Can you find that first part? The 13-year-old?
That sh-
Or is that what we're,
that is the part. That is the part.
is
I
that right?
thought okay, I thought I didn't like her,
You
but
tell me.
self never dislikes parts. You tell me because I felt me right now having that reaction to her. So maybe that is also another part, but that was the initial
So
feeling.
interesting. So interesting. Um, I, here's what I thought was happening.
Okay, okay.
And then you could tell me what actually happened. So I asked what in IFS would be kind of the diagnostic question about is somebody in self or are they blended with a part?
Hmm.
And the question was, how are you feeling towards this 13-year-old? And the answer was, there's some aversive energy.
Right.
And so I asked you if you could then find the part of you that's holding the aversive energy.
I see. I see. I think
But I,
if I had to say which part that was, it's definitely the firefighter.
good.
It's the
Yeah.
part of me that doesn't mind saying I don't like somebody.
So what what I think happened there was without maybe knowing that we were working with the firefighter, we listened to what you described as the negative energy. You actually then went into describing the manager's energy. Is that right?
Yeah, and
The anxiety, I want to be perfect. I need people to see. I don't want people to see that I'm not together.
right, right. And I think
Okay.
if I were to use the IFS language, I was blended with a firefighter, and I allowed
Mm-hmm.
myself, as you were speaking, to unblend and to approach the manager, the protector, with self
Yeah.
energy, with a little bit more compassion.
So That's great. So I just wasn't aware that that had happened so quickly.
Yeah.
Here I am thinking we pivoted to work with that part that doesn't like the manager, but actually just bringing some compassion and energy into the system, that part was able to step back kind of spontaneously.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
were able to then have compassion for this younger manager. And then you started to listen to what she was scared of. And just in listening and encountering her in self, that relationship began to change. And then you had a sense of, I want to be, and this is the maternal energy, I would say, I had this impulse to be provisional, like
Yeah.
a mom. And
Absolutely.
not just like a therapist, not just like a therapist who's like, okay, I hear you saying da da da, but even further, um, there was that spirit of like maybe even creativity. Oh, I can help you. I see a way to help you. Let
Yeah.
me let me come in here. You don't have to do this. And she felt it just like the little girl. She felt like she could trust it. Does that feel right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the sense
Yeah.
of relief. She could breathe
Mm.
all of a sudden. She's like,
Yeah.
thank goodness someone's here,
Hmm.
and someone can see also and appreciate how hard I've
Yeah.
been working to
Yeah.
run
Oh,
the
that was
ship.
important. That was important that she could be seen as a good part of you that's been working so hard. Yeah.
That
Not
is
just as
very
an anxious part.
EFT, right? That being
Uh-huh.
seen, that is in itself
Yes.
is healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Clearly it was. Could we try one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't worry. Not
No,
scary.
no,
Uh,
I'm all game. I'm all in.
so I want you to go back to her and let's just see what happens. If you go back in, try to go find her again.
I'm with
Okay.
her.
Just check. Okay, good. Can you ask her if there's anything that she would like to let go of right now?
The first thing that came to mind is she does not want to worry about grades anymore in school.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. And is there a place, and this may be odd, she may not feel this, but is there a place in her body where she holds that worry about grades, where she
Y-
feels it?
Yeah, it's like in her shoulders. She's like,
Okay. So I would like you right now to just put your hands where you feel it in your shoulders or where she feels it in her shoulders. Just let your hands be a symbol of like your attention and your presence. And if she wants to, in this place, she can take that energy and just pull it out of her shoulders and release it, release the worry about grades to the air, or to light, to fire, to water, to the earth. Just pull it out of there and let go of it. And see if she's able to do that. And if she's not, that's okay too. But
to be honest, she's eager to do it.
okay.
Yeah.
Is this a place she feels she can do it, or would she like to go to a safer place?
She's just really happy that someone is giving her the legitimacy
Yeah.
to
It's
release.
like it's okay.
Yeah.
She's allowed. It's, yeah, permission to let it go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Is it coming out? Is it letting go? Hmm.
Yeah, she's just releasing it into the air, and
Good.
she's doing it quickly. She doesn't want
Yeah.
it anymore.
Yeah, she's done with it. Yeah. Let it all out as much as she wants to. And then let her know that she can take to replace it, she could take in anything she wants.
You know what came up immediately
Well,
was curiosity. She
perfect.
she
Yeah.
wants to explore, not with the goal of being perfect or being validated by others, but just exploring with
Hmm.
her, following her
Yeah.
nose.
That's beautiful. That makes so much sense for her age too. To be curious and follow. I love that. Follow with her nose without worrying about being perfect or what other people think. Yeah. Let her breathe that in, that spirit of curiosity, and see how that feels for her. And then just notice and maybe even ask her what she wants to go do.
She wants to read and
Mm,
she wants to go work out. At that age I was in kung fu classes and I was
mm-hmm,
pretty heavily into it. Yeah. That's what
mm-hmm.
she wants to do and listen to music.
Yeah. So tell her she can go and do that. And that the other thing that you want to say before she goes is that you're here whenever she needs you. And that she can just come and get your attention now. She doesn't have to be alone. Does that feel right?
Yeah, she gave me a big hug.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. So before you end, just check in with your system and see if everybody's okay.
Yeah, if I could do that, it looks like the firefighter and the exile are just kind of looking and being really appreciative
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
what's happening in the room.
Yeah. They've been watching this whole thing and they're learning about you. They're seeing what just happened. And that's got to build some faith. It's got to build some trust. Yeah. Yeah. Well, come on back. Get
Wow.
oriented in the room a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Back with all
Yeah.
the lights.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That's
Amazing.
probably a little jolting. Yeah.
That was
So,
beautiful. That was beautiful.
yeah, that really was beautiful. That was a beautiful piece of work you just did. Really nice.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was it was nice to have some hand holding through it.
That's right. Yeah, isn't that an interesting parallel of yourself needed some hand holding so that you could do the appropriate hand holding with your parts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think that is the beauty of therapy. As you said, the
hmm,
therapist brings their own self energy and
right,
that really orients you.
right. Yeah, exactly. And you get the experience of the family system thinker of like, yeah, there needs to be somebody at the head of the system. There has to
Right.
be a leader at the head of the table that can be like, okay, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to you. Okay. And so self-leadership is a big part of the model that when the self is in the lead, um, parts are, I mean, you kind of felt the spontaneity of it and
Yeah.
how that just takes over.
And
Yeah.
I could really say that how I felt before and after,
Yeah. Let's notice that.
so
Notice how you feel now.
I feel such a relief, which is amazing
Mm,
because, you know, I I told the experience of the exile and the firefighter, and
mm-hmm,
I was good with them. We were in a good place, but there,
mm-hmm.
as I said, there was a manager in the corner, and I have just no patience to deal with her, and we're in a better relationship now. That
Yeah.
feels like I can relate to her in a different way, and I don't
Yeah.
need to blend with my
Yeah.
firefighter whenever I'm approaching her. I can just come to her with that maternal
Mm-hmm,
self energy
mm-hmm.
and say, hey, you don't need to run the ship anymore. It's all good.
That's right. That's right.
And that
She
feels
was,
different. That
sh
feels different.
You can feel a noticeable difference there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
How are your how are your feelings in the shoulders?
Yeah, yeah, it's released. And there's
Yeah.
honestly, doing it on the podcast, I think, is even more impactful because
Mm.
the manager really kicks in when I
Oh
hit
yeah.
record, you know? And that's something that I have been struggling with, just coming here, being myself, and the manager, when
Mm.
you have a 13-year-old perfectionist trying to run the show,
Well,
things can get tough.
I mean, listen, that's wonderful empathy for yourself and for her. I
Yeah,
cannot imagine, I cannot imagine how scary it would be to be a 13-year-old doing this podcast.
right.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
she's been doing a very good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah.
things I told her
Hmm.
is like, you're
Hmm.
almost damn near perfect. You've gotten
Uh-huh.
as close as anyone can, but really gotta let this go.
Uh-huh.
And that sense of compassion of like, being
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
seeing how hard that part of myself
Yeah.
was trying, to do good
Hmm.
for the entire
Hmm.
system. What
Yeah.
what an approach. What
It's
an
amazing.
amazing,
Isn't
yeah.
it great?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm 29. I've been reading psychology for a decade.
Hmm.
But this is something else. This is really, really amazing. And I really encourage people to get Dick Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts, and to
Hmm.
just play with it, just try it. It's you never know what will come up. Um,
Yeah.
it's really,
Yep.
really amazing. And thank you, Seth, for for this experience. It was really, really meaningful for me.
Yeah. Well, you're very welcome. And thank you again for the being willing to do it. It's obvious how much work you've done to get to the point of being this comfortable and courageous,
Thank
to
you.
take the risk. And um, yeah, yeah, I love what you've modeled today. I think it makes every part of this come alive.
I really
Um,
hope so. I really hope so.
IFS, when talked about, is it almost sounds like
Yeah.
fanciful.
Right, right.
But when you see it done, it starts to click a little bit more, and then when you do it, it really clicks. But yeah,
Right, right.
yeah. So
That feeling.
absolutely, really happy to do it.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So
You're welcome.
obviously we didn't get to Carl Jung today, and I really hope to have you back on the show to jump into archetypes, if you're willing.
Okay,
Yep,
of course, that would be great. That would be
amazing.
great. It's yeah, not as user friendly, but it'll be interesting.
We will definitely nerd out in that episode, and
Yeah,
I think we can
that's right. Yeah.
completely indulge our intellectual curiosity and just
Okay.
just have a jam session and talk about archetypes. And I have heard you talk about Jung, and I think that we can help kind of clear some of the misunderstandings around what archetypes are because
Hmm.
they are kind of being hijacked by the new age movement, and I would like to bring them
Mm.
back into our corner, if we will. So I
Okay.
think we could have fun there.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Seth. Always a pleasure.
Bye bye.